Hello, this is Nick Hodges, the Delphi Product Manager, and this is another edition of Turbo Delphi Demos. We've been working with classes a little bit the last few demos, and this time we'll continue with that, and we'll start talking about member scope and visibility. Okay, for this project, for this demo, I'm going to create a console application, and then to that console application I'm going to add 2 new units. I'm using the project manager. I right-click on the project name and I can select Add New Units. Now, we've worked with units before, and I've shown you in some of the previous demos how you can reference one unit from another unit and how you can use units in your project. Now, this first unit I'm going to save and name as base classes, and then unit 14 I'm going to save and name child classes. And then the project I'll just save as good old project 20. Now, base classes, in the base classes I'm going to create a simple base class. No surprise, I declare the identifier type, and then I can declare tBase class equals a class. And as I don't have to, all classes descend from tObject, so I'll make sure that that's explicit here. And then that is the name base classes. I'll save this. Now I'm going to go to child classes, and in the use interface section I'm going to add uses base classes. So now that I've declared this in the uses clause, child classes has available to it all of the types, variables, constants, and information available in the interface section, which means that I can also now declare a type called tChild class, which descends from tBase class. And now what I can do is I can begin declaring members on tBase class. Now, previously we've just been declaring items here without any scope specifiers, just like this. I'll actually change this to some integer so that there's no doubt about what it is. And we haven't been worrying about how those scope, what the scope of those members have been. Now, scope describes what can be seen where. If you want to limit scope, you limit what can be seen, and if you want to expand scope, you expand the places where things can be seen. Now, Delphi classes allow you to specify the scope of a given variable, of a given member. For instance, if I were to declare this scope private, the scope of some integer private, that would mean that the member itself is visible only within that class. So, for instance, I could, and then if I declare something public, that means that it is seeable by anybody using that class, including descendants of that class. So I can declare a procedure called do something. Can flesh out that procedure using Control Shift C, and then I can say some integer gets the value of 1. Now, if I were to save and compile this, you'll notice that it compiles because the sum integer is declared private and then it's used within the class. Now, however, if I were to go to child class, which is a descendant of tBase class, and I were to declare a public member here called procedure called do whatever, hit Control Shift C, scroll down a bit, you'll notice that if I try and access some integer, what am I doing? Some integer, and set its value to 2 or something like that, you'll notice that the compiler gives me this red squiggly line and says undeclared identifier some integer. And that is because private members cannot be seen by anything outside of the class, even descendant classes. Now, similar to private in some ways is protected. Protected members can be seen by the class, and they can be seen by descendant classes, but they cannot be seen by anybody trying to use the class. So in this case, with child classes, if I go to the child classes unit, now I can say some string gets whatever, any value here. And you notice that some integer doesn't work. You can have it, but some string does work. In other words, I can now save and compile the project, and it compiles no problem because some string is protected. Again, private means visible to the class itself only. Protected means visible to the class itself and descendant classes. And then we've got, so far, we also used public here, which means visible to the class itself, descended classes, and to anyone using the class. Now, we will go over to our project menu here, and we will now show how the users of the class, the visibility of these members for the users of the class. So we'll go test, we'll just declare a test, and we'll call it tBase class, and then we'll try and declare, we'll declare an instance test equals t, we'll instantiate an instance, excuse me. And now you'll see that test, I can see do something, but I can't see any of the private or protected members. Do something, remember, is public, but I can't see some string or some integer. If I try and use some string, here you'll notice that it's an arrow. If I try and use an error. If I try and use some integer, again, it's an error. You cannot see the those particular members because they are not in scope, because they have limited visibility via private and protected. However, you notice if I declare some double of type double in the public section, you'll notice now if I go over here, I can indeed set the value of test dot some double. I haven't compiled yet, so that's why there's an error. Yes, some double. If you want to see it in the code insight, you can see now it says some double there, and I can set that value to 1.2 or whatever. And that is because some double is public. Now you'll notice as well, public classes I can set, and descendant classes I can use the public classes as well. I could set some double to equal something else here. And that is all well and good. It will compile. So you can see that private is hidden for only the class itself. Protected means that they can be seen and used by the referenced in, seen, used, etc. in the base in the class itself and descendant classes. And public means it can be seen by the base class itself, descendant classes, and classes that use the that use and create an instance of the class. And there's an additional scope specifier called published, and that's usually given to properties most normally, because published properties and published items are visible through RTTI, runtime type information. And that's a little bit of an advanced topic, but runtime type information basically is information that can be found out about a class at runtime. And the most common use of that, or the use that you see most normally, is in the object inspector. Let me declare this for just to finish it out. I hit Control-C and it flushed it all out for me. And the object inspector, I'll save this and then I'll create a new instance of a VCL Forms application. And you'll notice the object inspector is viewable. Let me pull it off here too. The object inspector can see published properties of given components. So if I drop a button on here and I select the button and highlight it, you'll notice that a number of things can be, we know a number of things about this button, a number of properties, one of which is caption. I can change the caption, of course, like so. And all of these properties here that you see in the object inspector were scoped out as published, meaning that the runtime type information was available to the about those classes from the class itself, and then the IDE itself, via the object inspector, reads that runtime type information and creates all of these properties in the Object Inspector, and you can get and set published properties via the Object Inspector at runtime. And in fact, even though we're here designing, the IDE is running. So at runtime, the IDE is running these components and grabbing the runtime type information and using that information to create all of these properties in the Object Inspector. Okay, let's get everything set back up. Let's go back to where we were. We don't need to save projects there. Okay, I'll open back up base classes and child classes via the project manager. And now, so far, everything I've told you has been almost entirely true. In fact, there is a little quirk here to this, something that is a little not quite true with what I've told you, and that is private members can be viewed between classes of the same in the same unit. So, for instance, if we created T, if I declared T another class, and that might just be a class from T object, and then I created a method on that called procedure do another thing, I could actually, in fact, come along here and create a class called base, instance of a class called base class. And because we're in the same unit, when I create an instance of T base class, I can actually access the private members of T base class. And that's called friendship, i.e. friends can see each other's private parts. This is kind of the joke in the object-oriented world. And you'll notice that I can actually now set the value of this private class or private member from the class T base class in another class that's in the same unit. So classes that are in the same unit are friends of each other, and they can see each other's private members. Now there's even a way around that. And you'll notice, one other thing to notice, in addition to that, you can also see protected members. So I can actually say base class dot some string, and it'll see the protected string as well. Now there are ways around that, in that Pascal declares strict private and strict protected. Now if I can run and compile this, it'll give an error now, as you can see, because now that I've declared this as strict private and strict protected, these fields, these members here, are no longer visible as friends. Strict removes the friendship relationship between classes in the same unit. So if you want to be a purist, you should always actually declare strict private and strict protected instead of just plain private and protected. And the reason for this is just to maintain backwards compatibility with existing code. There is existing code even in the Visual Component Library itself that depends on this friendship relationship, and of course we don't want to break backwards compatibility of existing code when bringing new code forward. So we declare the strict. You can declare the strict word here in front of private and protected, and you will get real no kidding private and real no kidding protected. So that wraps it up for scope and visibility of class members today. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time on Turbo Delphi Demos.